Yemen has released a video showing a ship engulfed in flames. One word appeared on the screen, soon. That wasn't framed as propaganda. It was presented as a promise, and the message is being interpreted as directed at America's aircraft carriers now moving closer to Iranian waters. The Houthis have already carried out more than 100 attacks on ships in the Red Sea. 2 vessels have been sunk. 4 seafarers have been killed. Nearly 70% of cargo traffic has been forced to reroute around Africa, adding billions of dollars in delays and logistical costs. Now, according to their warning, operations are about to resume, and this time, American warships are described as primary targets. Multiple outlets have reported on the escalation. Military.com confirmed the threat. The Times of Israel verified the video. PBS News documented the rising tensions. The reporting across major platforms points in the same direction. Yemen is signaling potential action against U.S. forces. What is often left unsaid publicly is the level of anti-ship combat experience the Houthis have developed. They have successfully struck vessels more than 100 times. These were not simulations or exercises. These were real-world attacks against commercial and military targets. Their operational experience has been built through sustained engagements in active conflict zones. American sailors aboard the U.S. Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford are entering waters where anti-ship warfare has been repeatedly tested in real conditions. These deployments are occurring in an environment where adversaries have demonstrated capability, persistence, and adaptation through ongoing operations, but Yemen's warning represents only part of the broader picture. In Iraq, Kataib Hezbollah, designated by the United States as a foreign terrorist organization, issued a statement calling on fighters worldwide to prepare for what it described as comprehensive war in support of the Islamic Republic of Iran. Its leader, Abu Hussein al-Hamadawi, delivered direct language, warning that conflict with Iran would not be a walk in the park, and that Americans would face severe consequences. Al Jazeera reported on the statement. Iran International verified the quotes. PBS News documented mobilization. The Long War Journal from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies reported that Kataib Hezbollah has been threatening U.S. bases across the Middle East. Radio Free Europe highlighted a particularly significant development. Iraqi militias have launched recruitment efforts that include suicide bombers. Not conventional fighters alone, but individuals willing to carry out martyrdom operations. The distinction is critical. Suicide attackers are not recruited for defensive postures. They are recruited for operations that require human sacrifice. Explosive-laden boats targeting naval vessels, vests used near military checkpoints, or manually piloted drones directed at high-value targets. Kataib Hezbollah also warned that American bases in the region would not be immune from missiles and drones. The Long War Journal documented a rally outside the Iranian embassy in Baghdad, where a militia official stated that weapons were ready to strike American installations the moment fighting begins. That rally occurred before current U.S. carrier deployments reached full operational strength. It happened before this week's escalation reached what analysts are calling imminent crisis levels. The timeline suggests preparation began before the latest visible movements. This convergence is what analysts describe as strategically significant. Yemen threatening ships. Iraq recruiting suicide attackers. Hezbollah and Lebanon mobilizing fighters. Each development occurring within a compressed time frame. Each statement referencing defense of Iran. Each signaling readiness. PBS News reported that Hezbollah leader Sheikh named Qasem told supporters the group is preparing for possible aggression and remains determined to defend against it. The framing positions American military presence as aggression, creating justification narratives for potential action. Meanwhile, Iraq's Badr organization declared readiness to confront what it called American and Israeli arrogance if Iran is attacked. Harakat al-Nujaba issued similar warnings, stating the Persian Gulf region and Iraq could be drawn into fighting. GlobalSecurity.org documented these declarations. Press TV confirmed the mobilization. This is not a single group issuing isolated threats. It is multiple factions across different countries signaling coordinated readiness. Yemen has warned of resume attacks at sea. Iraqi militias have discussed missile and drone operations against bases. Hezbollah has emphasized preparedness. Iran is described as backing these aligned groups. Defense analysts cited by The Hill have warned that U.S. leadership may be underestimating the scale of risk. Some projections referenced casualty estimates in the hundreds, potentially higher if conflict expands across multiple fronts simultaneously. The challenge described as multidimensional. Anti-ship missiles and explosive boats in maritime zones, drone swarms and suicide attackers targeting bases, rocket fire across borders, and coordination from Tehran while maintaining formal deniability. This environment creates what some analysts call a strategic dilemma. Defending against simultaneous attacks across multiple locations would require expanded force deployment, sustained aerial patrols, maritime protection, and ground security across a region spanning roughly 1,000 miles. ESS Abraham Lincoln sailors have already faced extended deployments. Carrier presence is being maintained at high readiness levels. These extensions are typically associated with anticipation of sustained operational demands. Regional experts interviewed by Radio Free Europe noted that Iran may view any large-scale U.S. action as existential, distinguishing it from limited strikes in the past. That perception could influence how allied groups respond. The mobilization timeline shows Iraqi factions issuing threats, followed by calls for comprehensive war, followed by the Houthi video release, followed by additional militia declarations. Statements have appeared in close succession, each reinforcing escalation narratives. Recruitment drives focusing on martyrdom operations suggest preparation for missions that conventional tactics may not accomplish. Groups with prior leadership losses, including figures killed in earlier U.S. operations, have rebuilt structures over years, maintaining organizational continuity. Press TV reported that Harakat al-Nujaba warned that any attack on Iran could draw the broader region, including Gulf states and Iraq, into direct conflict. Spokespeople have described weakening Iran as a prelude to targeting allied groups in Baghdad and beyond. Strategic calculations appear interconnected. Yemeni leadership assessing risks to their position, Lebanese Hezbollah evaluating regional balances, Iraqi militias interpreting outcomes as directly affecting their future security. Popular mobilization forces in Iraq officially number over 140,000 fighters and have been integrated into Iraq's security structure since 2016. Hezbollah previously fielded tens of thousands of fighters, with current estimates suggesting reduced but still significant capabilities. The Houthis maintain territorial control over major population centers and possess missile and drone capabilities, demonstrated in repeated attacks. Combined, these groups represent a substantial force presence across multiple countries. U.S. personnel in the region number approximately 40,000, dispersed across installations and maritime assets. The question confronting decision-makers is whether escalation can be managed or whether simultaneous flashpoints could outpace containment efforts. Yemen's message used one word, soon. That word now anchors the timeline in the eyes of observers watching events unfold. That single word, soon, has intensified scrutiny across defense circles. Not months from now, not years, soon. And as American carrier strike groups move within operational range, questions about timing, capability, and coordination become central to strategic planning. Strategic planning. Iraqi militias have not limited their messaging to rhetoric. Recruitment announcements referencing martyrdom operations indicate preparation beyond symbolic mobilization. Suicide attackers are typically assigned to missions requiring penetration of hardened defenses. Explosive boats directed at naval assets, vests near secured installations, or manually guided drones targeting high-value infrastructure. Kataib Hezbollah publicly warned that U.S. bases throughout the region would not be immune from missiles and drones. During a rally outside the Iranian embassy in Baghdad, a militia official declared that weapons were ready and waiting for the moment fighting begins. That declaration occurred before the most recent carrier deployments were fully reinforced. The sequencing matters. Threats were issued before maximum American naval presence was visible. Analysts interpret that as evidence of pre-existing contingency planning rather than spontaneous reaction. At the same time, Hezbollah in Lebanon has framed its posture as defensive but resolute. Sheikh named Qasim emphasized readiness to confront what the group defines as aggression. The language used mirrors statements from Iraqi factions, emphasizing defense of Iran as intertwined with their own security. The Badr organization in Iraq stated it stands ready to confront American and Israeli actions if Iran is attacked. Harakat al-Nujaba warned that conflict could spread across the Persian Gulf and Iraq. These statements were documented by Global Security, org, and echoed by regional outlets. The convergence is what defense planners view as most concerning. Yemen signaling maritime attacks. Iraqi militias referencing drones and suicide operations. Hezbollah highlighting mobilization. Multiple groups employing aligned narratives within days of each other. The geographic spread compounds the complexity. Maritime choke points like the Strait of Hormuz require constant monitoring. Red Sea shipping lanes demand protection. U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria require layered air defenses. Israeli northern borders face rocket threats. Each theater presents distinct tactical challenges. Analysts have outlined what expanded defensive posture would entail. Additional carrier strike groups escorting commercial shipping, tens of thousands of additional troops securing installations, continuous combat air patrols, countering drone swarms, and minesweeping operations across strategic waterways, all while maintaining readiness for potential strikes on hardened targets. Such requirements resemble sustained regional war planning rather than limited crisis response. The timeline of public statements shows compressed escalation. Iraqi groups issued threats. Calls for comprehensive war followed. The Houthi video appeared. Additional factions declared readiness. Each announcement built on the previous one, expanding the scope of potential engagement. Recruitment details suggest operational planning is already underway. Once suicide units are recruited, trained, and ideologically committed, they become active assets within command structures. Demobilizing such forces after public mobilization carries internal organizational costs. The same applies to conventional fighters placed on alert status. Military mobilization generates momentum. Units prepare psychologically and logistically for combat. Standing down after visible escalation can undermine deterrence credibility. Jerusalem Post reported that Katabi Hezbollah maintains close ties to Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Previous leadership losses did not dissolve the organization. It rebuilt and maintained networks. Years of organizational consolidation now intersect with a moment of heightened regional tension. Press TV reported that Harakat al-Nujaba warned any attack on Iran would draw the entire region into conflict. Spokespersons argued that weakening Iran would set the stage for future targeting of allied groups in Iraq, reinforcing their decision to prepare now, rather later. From a strategic perspective, multiple actors appear to share the calculation that Iran's survival is directly tied to their own long-term security. That shared assessment reduces incentives for neutrality. Force numbers illustrate the scale. Iraq's popular mobilization forces officially include over 140,000 personnel integrated into national structures. Hezbollah, though reduced from previous peak strength, still fields thousands of fighters and maintains rocket capabilities. The Houthis control major northern Yemeni territories and possess missile, drone, and naval strike systems. Across these groups, total personnel counts exceed 200,000 fighters by various estimates. They operate within sovereign territories, possess advanced weaponry, and demonstrate cross-border messaging alignment. By comparison, U.S. forces in the broader Middle East region number roughly 40,000, dispersed across multiple bases and maritime platforms. Distribution across dozens of locations complicates concentrated defense. Defense experts referenced by The Hill warned that miscalculation at this stage could carry heavy consequences. Some projections cited potential casualty figures in the hundreds in early stages of coordinated conflict, with escalation potentially increasing totals. The complexity lies not only in numbers, but in simultaneity. Anti-ship missile threats at sea, drone and suicide operations at bases. Rocket barrages across borders, maritime mining and choke points, cyber disruptions accompanying physical attacks, multi-domain operations occurring within hours rather than weeks. Military planners rely on war game simulations to assess readiness. Scenarios involving simultaneous fronts strain logistical capacity. Reinforcements require transit time. Air defense systems have finite interception capacity. Maritime protection requires layered escorts and surveillance. Carriers such as U.S. Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford provide air power projection, but they also represent high-value targets. Their presence signals deterrence, but also concentrate strategic assets within contested zones. Extended deployments already signal anticipation of prolonged operational demand. Sailors facing delayed rotations reflect institutional assessment that sustained presence may be necessary. Diplomatically, options narrow as public mobilization deepens. Once multiple groups issue explicit threats, reputational stakes increase. Public statements create expectations among supporters. The citizens are still backing down without visible concessions, risks internal backlash within militant networks. At the same time, initiating large-scale strikes risks triggering the very regional convergence analysts warn about. The dynamic creates a decision matrix with limited middle ground. Authorize strikes and risk multi-front escalation or pursue negotiation amid public threats and mobilization. Regional experts note that Iran may interpret large-scale U.S. military action as existential. That perception could drive activation of all allied networks simultaneously rather than sequentially. The compressed timeline of statements, recruitment, and deployments suggests planning cycles were already in motion before the latest carrier movements reached full visibility. The central uncertainty is not whether threats were issued, they were, but how timing decisions will unfold once forces are positioned. Yemen's video said soon. Iraqi faction spoke of bitter consequences. Hezbollah emphasized determined defense. Each message was delivered publicly, recorded, and disseminated internationally. Mobilization has occurred. Forces are positioned. The region remains tense. The question now is whether escalation can be halted, or whether events have already gathered irreversible momentum. As mobilization continues across multiple theaters, the strategic trap described by analysts becomes clearer. Once public threats are issued, recruitment drives launched, and forces placed on alert. Stepping back becomes politically and militarily difficult. Suicide bombers who complete recruitment, training, and indoctrination are not symbolic assets. They are operational units assigned to missions. Command structures that prepare such units do so with defined objectives in mind. Similarly, missile batteries positioned, drones assembled, and rocket forces mobilized are integrated into contingency plans awaiting activation. Military mobilization generates internal momentum. Combat units psychologically prepare for engagement. Logistics chains shift into war posture. Intelligence collection intensifies. Standing down after full mobilization can damage credibility within ranks and among supporters. This dynamic is not limited to non-state actors. State militaries face similar pressures. Extended deployments of carrier strike groups signal expectation of sustained readiness. Sailors aboard USS Abraham Lincoln and U.S. Gerald R. Ford operate under heightened alert conditions. Ground personnel at regional bases review force protection protocols. Air units increase patrol frequencies. The geographic dispersion of U.S. forces complicates defense. Installations span Iraq, Syria, the Gulf, and maritime routes across the Red Sea and Arabian Sea. Protecting commercial shipping requires layered naval presence. Securing bases requires air defense systems capable of intercepting drones, rockets, and missiles. Analysts emphasize that adversaries control the timing of attacks. Coordinated strikes could occur across multiple fronts within a compressed window. Anti-ship missiles launched toward naval vessels. Drone swarms directed at bases. Rocket barrages along borders. Maritime mines deployed in choke points. Each front demanding immediate response. Wargame simulations conducted within defense planning environments often test such multi-front scenarios. Outcomes depend on response speed, air defense saturation thresholds, and reinforcement timelines. Sustained operations would require additional carrier groups, expanded troop deployments, continuous aerial patrols, and persistent maritime clearance operations. That scale of engagement resembles regional war rather than limited punitive action. Political considerations intersect with military realities. Decisions regarding authorization of strikes carry consequences beyond initial targets. Once kinetic operations begin, Allied networks may interpret them as confirmation of existential threat narratives. Regional leaders have framed the conflict in existential terms. Statements from Iraqi militias suggest that weakening Iran would expose Iraq to future targeting. Hezbollah rhetoric positions defense of Iran as defense of Lebanon's strategic balance. Yemeni leadership views outcomes as directly tied to its own survival calculus. When multiple actors share aligned threat perception, collective action becomes more likely. Estimates regarding force size illustrate asymmetry in distribution rather than absolute capability. Popular mobilization forces in Iraq number in the hundreds of thousands. Hezbollah retains thousands of trained fighters despite attrition. The Houthis' command missile and drone arsenals demonstrated in repeated maritime attacks. U.S. forces in the region number roughly 40,000 distributed across installations and naval platforms. While technologically advanced, they must divide defensive capacity across wide geographic areas. Defense experts cited by The Hill cautioned that miscalculation could produce significant casualties in initial waves of coordinated attacks. Early casualty projections in the hundreds were described as baseline estimates in worst-case scenarios. Such projections are not predictions but scenario outcomes modeled under stress conditions. Diplomatic channels remain active, but public mobilization narrows room for maneuver. Each statement delivered publicly creates internal accountability within militant hierarchies. Support bases expect follow-through. Failure to act after mobilization risks reputational damage. Conversely, initiating large-scale military action risks activating the very networks now mobilized. This is the dilemma confronting policymakers: deterrence through presence versus provocation through proximity. Carrier deployments signal resolve but also concentrate high-value assets in contested waters. Anti-ship missile systems and explosive maritime tactics have been repeatedly tested in the Red Sea. Defensive systems aboard carriers are advanced, but saturation scenarios test even sophisticated platforms. Ground bases rely on layered missile defense systems. Drone swarms and low-cost aerial systems challenge interception ratios. Sustained engagement strains resupply chains and maintenance cycles. Regional escalation would also impact civilian infrastructure. Shipping lanes disrupted, energy markets affected, airspace restrictions imposed, and population centers placed under rocket threat. No actor publicly describes seeking total war. Yet mobilization language across multiple groups references comprehensive conflict if Iran is attacked. The sequencing of events, threats, recruitment, video releases, deployments, suggests coordination rather than coincidence, according to several analysts. Each declaration reinforced escalation narratives within a compressed timeframe. Strategically, once forces are mobilized and positioned, even minor incidents can trigger disproportionate responses. Misidentification, miscalculation, or accidental engagement can escalate rapidly when both sides operate under high alert. The central uncertainty is not capability. All parties possess demonstrated capabilities, but decision timing? Yemen's video message used one word. Iraqi militias used stark language. Hezbollah emphasized determined defense. Each statement is on public record. American personnel across the region operate knowing those statements were made. The environment remains tense, layered, and highly reactive. The strategic environment now hinges on timing and decision-making under pressure. Mobilization has already occurred. Public statements have been delivered. Recruitment efforts have been documented. Carrier groups are deployed. Regional forces are positioned. The remaining variable is who moves first and how others interpret that move. If U.S. strikes are authorized against Iranian targets, Allied networks across Yemen, Iraq, and Lebanon have already signaled readiness to respond. If Allied groups initiate attacks first, they are likely to frame them as preemptive defense against anticipated aggression. Either pathway risks rapid escalation. Anti-ship missile launches toward naval vessels in contested waters. Drone and rocket attacks on regional bases. Maritime mining operations disrupting choke points. Cross-border rocket fire expanding conflict lines. Each front requiring immediate defensive and offensive coordination. Such a scenario would demand expanded force deployment, additional carrier strike groups escorting commercial shipping, tens of thousands of ground personnel reinforcing base security, continuous air patrols intercepting drone swarms, sustained mine-clearing missions in strategic waterways. Executing those requirements resembles full wartime mobilization rather than limited engagement. Standing down after visible mobilization may be interpreted internally by those groups as weakness. That perception could shape future deterrence calculations. This is the narrowing corridor described by analysts. Escalation risks catastrophe. De-escalation risks reputational and strategic erosion. Casualty projections cited in defense commentary describe baseline estimates in the hundreds if coordinated attacks occur early in conflict. Escalation across multiple fronts could increase those numbers significantly. These figures reflect scenario modeling rather than certainties, but they underscore the stakes. Beyond military losses, regional infrastructure would likely face disruption. Shipping lanes in the Red Sea and Strait of Hormuz could be interrupted. Energy markets could experience volatility. Civilian populations across Iraq, Yemen, Lebanon, and Israel could be exposed to sustained rocket or drone fire. No participant emerges unscathed in such a conflict. American forces would absorb casualties and resource strain. Iranian infrastructure could face sustained bombardment. Iraqi territory could again become battleground space. Yemen could endure intensified strikes. Lebanon could see expanded cross-border fighting. Israel's northern frontier could face persistent rocket fire. The mobilized groups appear to share a strategic calculation that Iranian survival is inseparable from their own. That shared assessment drives synchronized readiness. For U.S. personnel stationed across the region, the uncertainty is immediate. Sailors aboard deployed carriers operate, knowing maritime threats have been publicly declared. Soldiers on regional bases are aware of recruitment drives referencing martyrdom operations. Air crews maintain alert posture amid escalating rhetoric. The Hill's warning about miscalculation reflects concern that the convergence of mobilization, public threats, and force positioning reduces margin for error. Even limited engagements could trigger broader activation of aligned groups. Wargame analyses consistently emphasize that once multiple fronts ignite simultaneously, containment becomes exponentially harder. Reinforcements require transit time. Defensive systems face saturation thresholds. Political decision-making compresses into hours rather than days. Yemen's video said soon, Iraqi factions promised severe consequences. Hezbollah emphasized determined defense. Each message was disseminated widely. Each contributed to a climate of expectation. Mobilization momentum now interacts with strategic signaling on all sides. Whether escalation occurs depends on decisions made under intense pressure, interpretations of intent, and reactions to initial moves. American carriers sailing within operational range are intended to deter. Yet their presence also positions them within threat envelopes described publicly by adversaries. The convergence across Yemen, Iraq, Lebanon, and Iran has created a volatile equilibrium, one sustained only as long as no trigger event crosses the threshold. The word soon remains undefined in timing but defined in implication, and until actions either validate or diffuse that implication, the region remains balanced between deterrence and outbreak, with forces on all sides prepared for either outcome.